The warm Phoenix evening settled over the city as Judge Samuel Carter took his usual evening walk along Central Avenue. The city lights sparkled against the darkening sky, creating a false sense of serenity that masked the underlying tensions he'd spent decades fighting against. At 62, Samuel had earned his reputation as one of the most respected figures in the Supreme Court, known for his unwavering commitment to racial equality and justice reform. Walking past the illuminated office buildings, Samuel reflected on the morning's controversial case, another instance of racial profiling that had landed on his desk. His phone buzzed with a message from his daughter Zoe, but before he could read it, the sound of rapid footsteps approached from behind. "Police! Don't move!" The sharp command cut through the evening air. 3 officers emerged from a patrol car, weapons drawn. Samuel's heart rate spiked, but he remained calm, years of courtroom experience steadying his voice. "Officers, I'm Judge Samuel Carter of the Supreme," he began, raising his hands slowly. "On the ground. Now." The lead officer's voice cracked with tension. Samuel noticed the officer's hand shaking on his weapon, a detail that would later haunt him. "There must be a misunderstanding," Samuel said, maintaining his composure. "If you'll allow me to reach for my identification." The next few seconds unfolded in slow motion. A burst of movement from one of the younger officers, the mechanical click of a taser being deployed, and Samuel's world exploded in pain. The electrical current ripped through his body, sending him crashing to the concrete. His glasses shattered on impact. Nearby pedestrians froze in horror. Someone started recording with their phone. Samuel's muscles contracted involuntarily as the voltage coursed through him, his judicial robe tangling around his legs. The same robe that had commanded respect in his courtroom now lay twisted on the dirty sidewalk. "Stop! He's a judge!" A woman's voice pierced through the chaos. More phones emerged, capturing the moment a respected Supreme Court judge lay convulsing on the ground, another victim of the very system he'd tried to reform. The officers, realizing their mistake, scrambled to respond, but the damage was done. Samuel's last conscious thought before darkness claimed him was of Zoe's unread message, and how this moment would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire justice system he'd sworn to uphold. This was no longer just about one man's experience with law enforcement. As bystanders gathered and sirens wailed in the distance, the incident was already spreading across social media platforms. Within hours, this quiet Phoenix street would become ground zero for a national conversation about police brutality, racial profiling, and the broken systems that allowed such incidents to persist. Blood trickled from where Samuel's head had hit the pavement, a stark contrast against the white of his judicial robe. The officers, now panicked, called for medical assistance. But they couldn't call back the videos already uploading to Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. They couldn't erase the witnesses' shocked expressions or unhear their gasps of recognition as someone whispered, "That's Judge Carter." The night air, which moments ago had carried the peace of a routine evening, now crackled with tension and the promise of upheaval. This wasn't just another case of mistaken identity. This was the spark that would ignite a movement, though none of the participants yet realized the full scope of what was about to unfold. The video of Judge Carter's assault spread like wildfire across social media platforms. The shaky footage, captured by a college student, showed the moment with brutal clarity. A distinguished older man in judicial robes, hands raised in surrender, being tased without provocation. Within hours, justice for Samuel trended nationwide, accompanied by clips that had been viewed millions of times. Maya Rodriguez sat in the law library at Arizona State University, her constitutional law textbooks forgotten as she watched the video for the 5th time. Her hands trembled with a mixture of rage and determination. As a third-year law student who had followed Judge Carter's career, she recognized him immediately. The man who had inspired her to pursue law was now the latest victim of the system she was preparing to enter. "This isn't just another hashtag," she announced to her study group, closing her laptop with decisive force. "We're law students. We have the knowledge, the resources, and the responsibility to act." Her colleagues, usually absorbed in their casebooks, looked up with newfound purpose. Within an hour, Maya had created a Facebook event for a protest, coordinating with local civil rights organizations and student groups. Meanwhile, at Banner University Medical Center, Judge Carter lay in a private room, heart monitors beeping steadily. The fall had resulted in a mild concussion, and the taser had left painful burns on his chest. But the physical injuries paled compared to the psychological impact. Every time he closed his eyes, he relived the moment, the terror, the helplessness, the humiliation. Zoe Carter paced outside her father's room, fielding calls from reporters and declining interview requests. At 32, she had built her own career, carefully avoiding her father's shadow, working in corporate law, where his influence in civil rights couldn't affect her trajectory. Now, watching him through the hospital room window, she felt the careful separation she'd maintained crumbling. "Ms. Carter," a nurse approached with a tablet, "have you seen this?" The protest announcement had already gathered 10,000 responses. Maya's carefully worded call to action included a photo of Judge Carter from a recent civil rights conference, juxtaposed with a still from the viral video. The contrast was shocking. Inside the room, Samuel watched CNN's coverage of his own assault. The network had obtained security camera footage from a nearby building, providing another angle of the incident. The commentary focused on his reputation. 20 years on the bench, dozens of landmark decisions on civil rights cases, and now, ironically, a victim of the very injustice he'd fought against. "Dad," Zoe entered the room, her professional facade cracking. "People want statements." The governor called. Even the president's office reached out. She paused, watching him stare at the TV. "What do you want me to tell them?" Samuel turned to his daughter, his usually commanding presence diminished by the hospital gown, but his eyes sharp with purpose. "Tell them," he said slowly, "that this isn't about me. This is about every person who didn't have a camera pointed at them when it happened. This is about every victim who didn't have my title or position to protect them." Outside the hospital, Maya's protest was taking shape. Students from the law school gathered with signs, their numbers growing as local news crews arrived. The hashtag had evolved, with people sharing their own stories of police encounters, creating a digital testament to a systemic problem. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force Phoenix and the nation to face uncomfortable truths about law enforcement, privilege, and justice. As night fell on the city again, thousands of notifications lit up phones across America, all carrying the same message. Justice for Samuel, justice for all. Tomorrow, dawn, Phoenix City Hall. Maya's laptop screen glowed in the dim law library as she dug through public records, her determination growing with each document she uncovered. Officer James Morrison, the one who fired the taser, had 3 prior excessive force complaints. Officer Sarah Chen had transferred from another precinct following an internal review. The 3rd officer, David Reynolds, had a seemingly clean record, suspiciously clean, as if scrubbed. "Look at this," Maya whispered to her study partner, pointing at a pattern emerging across the files. The same supervising officer had dismissed all previous complaints against Morrison. Similar incidents, different victims, identical outcomes, no disciplinary action taken. Maya started a spreadsheet, mapping connections between dates, locations, and officers involved. A system of protection began to emerge. Across town, Samuel Carter's hospital room phone rang. The caller ID showed William Hayes, his old friend from law school and now a prominent civil rights attorney. Samuel's hand hesitated over the receiver, knowing this call would force decisions he wasn't sure he was ready to make. "Sam," Hayes's voice carried decades of shared battles. "You have to fight this, not just for yourself." Samuel closed his eyes, remembering countless cases he'd presided over. Similar stories, different faces. "Bill, I'm tired. Maybe it's time for someone else to carry this torch." "Like hell it is," Hayes responded sharply. "You're not just a victim here, Sam. You're a symbol. Your position, your reputation. They can't bury this like they do with others. We finally have their playbook exposed through someone they can't ignore." Meanwhile, in her downtown apartment, Zoe Carter sat surrounded by press releases and interview requests. Her corporate law expertise felt useless in this storm of civil rights and public opinion. A text from her firm's senior partner blinked on her phone. "Take all the time you need, but remember, your response could affect your partnership track." The message crystallized everything she'd been avoiding. Her carefully constructed career, built deliberately distant from her father's advocacy, now hung in the balance. A knock at her door startled her. Maya stood there, clutching a laptop and looking apologetic. "Ms. Carter, I'm Maya Rodriguez, a law student. I've been researching the officers involved in your father's case, and there's something you need to see." Zoe almost turned her away, but something in Maya's expression made her pause. "Come in," she said, making a decision that would alter both their paths. Maya spread her research across Zoe's dining table: complaint records, transfer documents, pattern analyses. "It's not just about that night," Maya explained, her voice gaining confidence. "These officers are part of a larger system. Your father's case could expose everything." As they pored over the documents, Zoe's phone buzzed again. Another text from her firm: "Distance yourself while you can. This could get messy." Looking at Maya's meticulous research, then at her phone, Zoe felt the weight of her father's legacy and her own carefully constructed walls colliding. "Show me everything," she finally said, deleting the text. Back in his hospital room, Samuel watched the evening news coverage of growing protests. His judicial robe hung in the closet, a symbol of the authority that hadn't protected him that night. Hayes's words echoed in his mind as he watched young faces on the screen chanting his name. "Dad?" Zoe stood in the doorway, Maya beside her. "We need to talk about what happens next." Samuel saw something in his daughter's expression he hadn't seen in years, the same fire that had driven him to the bench, the same determination that had sustained him through decades of fighting for justice. The torch, it seemed, wasn't his to pass on or put down. It had already ignited a new generation of warriors. As night settled over Phoenix, 3 generations of legal minds gathered in that hospital room, each bringing their own weapons to the fight. Samuel's experience, Zoe's insider knowledge, and Maya's fresh determination. The system that had protected corrupt officers for so long was about to face its greatest challenge, though none of them yet realized just how deep the corruption went or how high the cost of exposure would be. The internal affairs investigation into the Carter incident started as a formality, but quickly evolved into something more significant. Detective Sarah Martinez, assigned to lead the investigation, found herself swimming in irregularities. Officer Morrison's body camera had malfunctioned at the crucial moment. Officer Chen's report contained timestamps that didn't match dispatch records. Reynolds' account contradicted multiple witness statements. "This goes beyond a simple mistake," Martinez muttered, comparing surveillance footage with official reports. Her office walls were now covered with timeline charts and connection diagrams. Each thread she pulled revealed another inconsistency, another covered track, another layer of protection. At the hospital, Samuel Carter made a decision that would shake the department to its core. Against his doctor's advice and Zoe's initial protests, he called a press conference. The hospital's conference room filled with reporters, cameras, and tension. Samuel entered in his judicial robes, the symbol of authority he'd worn for decades, now serving as armor. "My name is Samuel Carter," he began, his voice steady despite the lingering effects of his injuries. "I am a judge of the Supreme Court, but I stand before you today as a citizen who has experienced firsthand the brutality that many in our community face daily. The only difference is that my title made my story newsworthy." The cameras clicked furiously as he continued. "This incident is not about me. It's about a system that allows law enforcement officers to act with impunity, knowing their actions will be protected. It's about every person who has faced similar treatment, but lacked the platform to demand justice." Meanwhile, Maya had transformed her law school study group into an investigative team. They worked from a makeshift command center in the library's basement, walls covered with printouts of police reports, witness statements, and social media posts. Her professors had granted her independent study credits, recognizing the real-world application of their lessons. "Look at this pattern," she pointed out to her colleagues. "Every time these officers are involved in a controversial incident, the same names appear in the review process. The same supervisors clear them. The same language appears in their reports." The city buzzed with tension as Maya's planned demonstration approached. What started as a law school protest had evolved into a citywide movement. Civil rights organizations, community leaders, and citizens who'd faced similar encounters with law enforcement joined the cause. On the morning of the demonstration, thousands gathered outside the courthouse, where Samuel had presided for years. Maya stood on the steps, megaphone in hand, surrounded by a sea of faces carrying signs with Samuel's image and demands for justice. "We're not just here for Judge Carter," her voice rang out across the crowd. "We're here for every person who's been silenced, every incident that's been covered up, every officer who's been protected instead of held accountable." Inside the building, Detective Martinez received an anonymous envelope. The contents, internal memos, altered reports, deleted body camera footage, confirmed her suspicions about systematic cover-ups within the department. Her hands shook as she realized the scope of what she'd uncovered. Samuel watched the coverage from his home, now released from the hospital, but still bearing the physical and emotional scars of that night. The sight of so many people united in the cause of justice moved him deeply, but it also worried him. He knew from experience how power structures fought back when threatened. Zoe entered his study, carrying more files from Maya's investigation. "Dad," she said, her corporate lawyer facade completely gone now. "This is bigger than we thought. The department's internal communication shows a pattern of targeting specific neighborhoods, altering evidence, and protecting officers who cross the line." Samuel nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what they'd stumbled upon. "They won't let this go easily," he warned. "Are you ready for what comes next?" "I've spent years avoiding your fights," Zoe admitted. "Maybe it's time I joined one." Outside, the chants grew louder. The movement had taken on a life of its own, fueled by years of suppressed grievances and newfound hope for change. But in the shadows, those with power to lose were already planning their response, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test everyone's commitment to justice. The city of Phoenix held its breath, knowing that the next moves in this chess game would determine not just the fate of those involved, but the future of law enforcement accountability across the nation. The steps of Phoenix City Hall vibrated with the energy of thousands of protesters. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing the sea of people gathered below. Samuel Carter stood at his office window, watching as the crowd continued to grow. A news crew had set up nearby, their van's satellite dish extending skyward. Tom Reynolds, a veteran reporter from CNN, approached Samuel with his crew in tow. "Judge Carter, your case has become a flashpoint for police reform nationwide. What's your response to the department's claim that this was an isolated incident?" Samuel adjusted his tie, the bruises from his encounter still visible on his neck. 20 years on the bench taught me one thing. There are no isolated incidents. What happened to me is a symptom of a systemic problem that has gone unchecked for far too long. The reporter pressed further. The police union issued a statement defending the officer's actions, citing the high crime area and recent robberies. Your response? I was wearing my judicial robes, Samuel replied, his voice carrying years of controlled anger. I was walking in a well-lit area near the courthouse where I've worked for decades. If someone in my position can be treated this way, imagine the experience of those without my privileges. Down in the crowd, Maya found herself surrounded by a group of community activists. Their stories poured out: mothers whose sons had been profiled, business owners who'd faced harassment, students who'd been stopped without cause. Each account strengthened her resolve. My brother was tased 3 years ago, a young woman told Maya, her voice shaking. No one believed him. No one investigated. But now, with Judge Carter's case, she couldn't finish the sentence, but Maya understood. The judge's status had forced people to confront a reality they'd long ignored. From his office, Samuel watched the coverage spread across multiple networks. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues across the country. Other judges, normally hesitant to speak out, were breaking their silence. His case had cracked the veneer of judicial neutrality, forcing his peers to confront their role in perpetuating or challenging systemic injustice. The emotional weight of the moment hit him as he watched Maya orchestrate the crowd below. Her law school peers had transformed into organized activists, directing medical stations, coordinating with legal observers, and documenting everything. They were applying their legal education in real time, on the streets rather than in classrooms. Back outside, the atmosphere shifted as counter-protesters arrived, a small but vocal group of police supporters and union representatives. Maya's team quickly reorganized, creating a buffer zone between the groups. Their preparation and discipline impressed Samuel, who recognized the legal principles being put into practice. Your daughter's down there, Reynolds noted, pointing to where Zoe had joined Maya's coordination team. She wore a business suit, looking out of place among the activists, but working with clear purpose, using her corporate law experience to advise protesters of their rights. Samuel felt a complex mix of pride and concern. The movement had given him back his daughter, but at what potential cost to her career? The same question echoed across the protest. How much were people willing to risk for change? The day's emotion peaked as the crowd began sharing testimonies through a makeshift speaker system. Story after story emerged, each one adding weight to the demand for reform. Samuel's case had opened a floodgate of suppressed experiences, creating a narrative too powerful to dismiss. As evening approached, Maya organized a candlelight vigil. Thousands of phones and candles illuminated the gathering darkness, creating a powerful image that would lead news broadcasts nationwide. Samuel, watching from above, saw more than just a protest. He saw the awakening of a generation's conscience. But amid the hope and unity, darker currents moved beneath the surface. Security cameras tracked faces in the crowd. Plainclothed officers noted names and took photos. The system, though exposed, wasn't ready to change without a fight. The sun set on Phoenix, but the movement had only begun to rise. Samuel's case had become a catalyst, but the real battle, the fight to transform outrage into lasting change, still lay ahead. As Maya led the crowd in a final chant, her voice carrying across the plaza, Samuel understood that his role had evolved. He was no longer just a victim or even a symbol. He had become part of something much larger than himself. In Samuel's study, father and daughter sat facing each other across his antique desk. The room, usually a sanctuary of legal thought, felt heavy with unspoken emotions. Zoe fidgeted with her watch, a nervous habit from childhood. I've lost 3 clients, she finally admitted. The firm is concerned about my recent public activism. That's code for back off or lose your partnership track. Her voice carried both frustration and determination. Samuel leaned forward, his judicial demeanor softening. "You don't have to fight this battle, Zoe. I never wanted my choices to limit your path." "That's exactly why I stayed away for so long." Zoe stood, pacing the room. "I built my career avoiding anything controversial, anything that could link me to your advocacy. But watching that video, seeing you on the ground..." She stopped, facing the wall of legal texts that had shaped both their lives. "I'm not just your daughter. I'm a lawyer who witnessed an injustice. How can I stay silent?" The upcoming public hearing loomed over Phoenix like a gathering storm. Expert witnesses had been called, including Dr. Angela Thompson, a leading authority on police reform, and former Police Commissioner James Mitchell, known for implementing successful accountability measures in other cities. Maya spent hours in the law library, preparing research for the hearing. Her professors had granted her special permission to focus on the case, recognizing its educational value. She compiled statistics, case studies, and policy recommendations, building a comprehensive argument for systemic change. The preparation was interrupted by an unexpected encounter. Walking to her car late one night, Maya found Officer Morrison leaning against her vehicle. He wasn't in uniform, but his stance carried the authority of his badge. "You're digging into things you don't understand," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Some stones are better left unturned." Maya stood her ground, though her heart raced. "Are you threatening me, Officer Morrison?" "Just offering friendly advice." He straightened up, stepping closer. "Young careers are fragile things. So are reputations. Judge Carter's got his status to protect him. What do you have?" The interaction lasted less than a minute, but its implications echoed long after Morrison left. Maya's hands shook as she called Zoe, then Samuel. The intimidation attempt only reinforced their suspicions about the department's culture of fear and protection. The next morning, Samuel prepared for his testimony. His judicial robe hung pressed and ready, but for the first time in his career, he questioned what it represented. He would enter the hearing not as a judge, but as a victim seeking justice, a role reversal that challenged everything he thought he knew about the system. "The officers involved have submitted their statements," Zoe reported, reviewing the latest documents. "They're sticking to their story about responding to a robbery description, but the timestamps don't match dispatch records." Maya arrived with more findings. "We've identified 5 similar incidents in the past year alone. Same officers, same pattern of excessive force, same supervisors clearing them. The only difference is that this time they chose the wrong target." The hearing room was being prepared, its austere walls soon to contain testimonies that could reshape local law enforcement. Security measures were heightened after Morrison's interaction with Maya. Though no formal complaint had been filed, they all understood the futility of reporting intimidation to the same system they were challenging. As evening fell, Samuel, Zoe, and Maya gathered in his study, surrounded by case files and preparation notes. The weight of tomorrow's hearing pressed down on them. Each had sacrificed something to reach this point: Samuel's sense of security, Zoe's carefully constructed career path, Maya's academic focus. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Samuel addressed them both, "remember that the truth doesn't always bring justice, but without truth, justice is impossible." Outside, police cars cruised past the house more frequently than usual. Inside, 3 generations of legal minds prepared for a battle that would test not just their arguments, but their courage to stand against a system designed to protect its own. The hearing would be more than a legal proceeding. It would be a moment of reckoning for a city forced to confront its deepest flaws. The hearing room hummed with tension as Samuel Carter approached the witness stand. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, documenting the moment a Supreme Court judge would testify as a victim of police brutality. The wooden chair creaked as he settled in, his judicial robe replaced by a formal suit, a deliberate choice to emphasize his role as a citizen seeking justice. "Judge Carter," the lead investigator began. "Please describe the events of that night." Samuel's testimony cut through the formal atmosphere with brutal clarity. He described the approach of the officers, the ignored attempts to identify himself, the searing pain of the taser, and the indignity of lying helpless on the concrete. His measured tone made the account even more powerful, years of judicial experience lending weight to every word. "I felt not just the physical pain," he concluded, "but the crushing realization that if this could happen to me, wearing my robes, what chance do ordinary citizens have?" Throughout the day, victim after victim took the stand. A high school teacher describing a traffic stop that left him traumatized. A medical student who was slammed against her car while reaching for her registration. Each story echoed elements of Samuel's experience, building a damning pattern of abuse. Maya sat with her legal pad, documenting every testimony. Her research had helped identify these witnesses, each case connecting back to the officers involved in Samuel's incident. The pattern was undeniable. Same officers, same aggressive tactics, same departmental protection. The mood shifted when Officer Morrison took the stand. His practiced responses crumbled under cross-examination as Maya's research proved crucial. The timeline inconsistencies couldn't be explained away. The missing body camera footage raised too many questions. His previous complaints, though buried, had left a trail. "Officer Morrison," the investigator pressed, "can you explain why your incident report mentions receiving a robbery alert at 9:15 p.m. when dispatch records show no such alert was issued?" Morrison's confidence wavered. In the gallery, his supervising officers shifted uncomfortably. The carefully constructed narrative was unraveling. Zoe, sitting beside Maya, watched her father's face as Morrison stumbled through his responses. Samuel maintained his judicial composure, but she recognized the subtle signs of controlled anger in his expression. Years of witnessing similar testimonies from the bench had taught him to recognize deflection and deception. The hearing's most powerful moment came from an unexpected source. Officer Chen, the youngest of the three involved, broke ranks. Her voice trembling but determined, she described a department culture that rewarded aggression and punished those who questioned authority. "We were taught that control meant force," she testified, avoiding her colleagues' glares. "Any hesitation could cost your career, or worse." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Reporters rushed to file updates. Police union representatives huddled with their lawyers. Samuel caught Maya's eye across the room. This was the crack in the wall they'd been working toward. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the hearing room windows, the day's testimony had painted a clear picture of systemic failure. But it had also revealed something else: the possibility of change from within, sparked by truth-tellers like Officer Chen. The hearing concluded with Samuel's closing statement. Standing at the podium, he addressed not just the panel, but the cameras broadcasting to the nation. "What happened to me was not unique. It was not an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of a system that prioritizes power over protection, force over justice. Today, we've heard stories that demand more than just individual accountability. They demand fundamental change." As the hearing adjourned, the impact was immediate. Social media exploded with clips of testimony. News anchors began using terms like systemic reform and cultural overhaul. The public narrative was shifting from a single incident to a recognition of deeper problems. Outside the courthouse, Maya organized the gathered crowd in a peaceful demonstration of support for Officer Chen and other potential whistleblowers. The message was clear: those who chose truth over loyalty would find community support. But in a quiet corner of the parking garage, Morrison and his remaining supporters huddled in intense discussion. Their power was threatened, their methods exposed. History had shown that such moments were when threatened institutions became most dangerous. The hearing had ended, but the real battle was just beginning. As Samuel, Zoe, and Maya left the courthouse, they knew that exposing the truth was only the first step. Transforming that truth into lasting change would require even more courage, persistence, and unity. The mahogany-paneled office of Marcus Thompson, one of the nation's most prominent civil rights attorneys, buzzed with focused energy. Thompson had flown in from Washington, D.C. after watching Samuel's testimony, recognizing the case's potential to set nationwide precedents. "Judge Carter," Thompson said, spreading files across his temporary desk. "Your case is the key that could unlock dozens of similar situations across the country. We're not just talking about individual officers anymore. We're looking at systemic failure on a constitutional level." Samuel nodded, understanding the implications. His personal incident had opened a door to challenge qualified immunity and departmental protection protocols at a federal level. The legal stakes had grown far beyond what he'd initially imagined. Meanwhile, in a cramped room at the law library, Maya had discovered something disturbing. Buried in thousands of departmental emails obtained through public records requests was a pattern of communication between Officer Morrison and several high-ranking department officials. The messages, carefully worded but clear in intent, showed a coordinated effort to protect officers with multiple complaints. "Look at this." Maya pointed to her laptop screen, showing Zoe a series of emails. Every time a complaint was filed against Morrison or his team, the same sequence followed. Internal affairs would be redirected, witnesses would be discouraged from testifying, and evidence would mysteriously become corrupted or lost. Zoe's corporate law experience helped her recognize the implications. This isn't just cover-up. This is conspiracy. They've created a parallel system of justice within the department. The evidence trail led to Chief Williams himself. Maya had mapped out a complex web of relationships, favors, and protected officers that extended beyond Phoenix to other departments across the state. The corruption wasn't isolated. It was institutional. Samuel and Maya arranged a secret meeting in the judge's chambers after hours. The room, usually a space for legal contemplation, now felt like a war room. They spread their evidence across his desk: internal emails, disciplinary records, witness statements, and financial transactions that suggested a deeper level of corruption. "The department isn't just protecting its own," Maya explained, connecting threads on her evidence board. "They're actively targeting officers who try to report misconduct." Officer Chen's testimony was just the tip of the iceberg. Samuel studied the documents, his judicial experience allowing him to see the bigger picture. "This goes beyond excessive force," he noted. "They've created a system that punishes integrity and rewards silence. Every officer knows that speaking up means ending their career." The situation became more urgent when Maya received an anonymous email containing video footage from inside the department. The clips showed officers being instructed on how to handle problem witnesses and adjust their body camera footage. The source was unclear, but the content was damning. "We need to move carefully," Thompson advised during a secure video call. "Release this too soon and they'll discredit it. Time it wrong and they'll bury it. We need a strategy that makes the evidence impossible to ignore." Zoe, who had been monitoring department reactions through her legal contacts, brought more concerning news. "They're preparing something big," she reported. "My sources say Morrison and his supporters are gathering dirt on everyone involved, including you, Dad." The threat was clear. They were dealing with a system that had decades of practice in protecting itself. Any mistake, any rush to expose the truth without proper preparation could backfire catastrophically. Samuel, Maya, and Thompson worked late into the night, crafting a legal strategy that would protect their witnesses while systematically exposing the department's corruption. They knew they needed to move fast. Every day meant more opportunities for evidence to disappear and witnesses to be intimidated. "We're not just filing a case. Thompson explained as they finalized their plan. "We're dismantling a power structure that's been in place for generations. They won't go down without a fight." As midnight approached, the gravity of their undertaking settled over the room. They had moved beyond seeking justice for one incident. They were now challenging an entire system of institutionalized corruption. The evidence they'd gathered could reshape law enforcement not just in Phoenix, but across the country. The question wasn't just whether they could win in court. It was whether they could survive the fight long enough to get there. The system they were challenging had resources, influence, and a proven willingness to use both to protect itself. The police department's retaliation came swiftly and strategically. A press release landed on every major news desk in Phoenix, containing allegedly sealed records from Samuel's early career. The document suggested he had shown bias in several racially charged cases, painting him as a hypocrite who had protected corrupt officials himself. "Absolute fabrication," Samuel said firmly, reviewing the documents in his study. His hands trembled not with fear, but with rage. "They've altered court transcripts, taken statements out of context. They're trying to destroy my credibility before we can present our evidence." Maya worked frantically to counter the false narrative. Her law school training now focused on crisis management. She organized a team to fact-check every case mentioned in the release, comparing the department's versions with official court records. The discrepancies were glaring, but the damage was already spreading through social media. The second hearing approached. This one focused specifically on departmental practices. The stakes had risen dramatically. Samuel would face not just the officers involved in his assault, but the entire system that had protected them. Inside the hearing room, the tension was palpable. Police union lawyers filled one side, their expressions confident. They had weathered similar storms before, but they hadn't counted on Officer Chen's continued cooperation or on Maya's meticulous research. "The department's records show a disturbing pattern," Maya testified, presenting her findings. "Officers with multiple complaints aren't just protected, they're promoted. Those who report misconduct find themselves assigned to dangerous areas without backup. It's a systematic approach to enforcing silence." The police chief, under oath, tried to maintain the department's position. "These allegations are baseless," he insisted. "Judge Carter's incident was unfortunate, but it doesn't reflect our department's values or practices." Then came the moment that changed everything. Maya played the anonymous video footage, crystal clear evidence of departmental training sessions, teaching officers how to avoid accountability. The room fell silent as they watched supervisors, including those present at the hearing, instructing officers on tampering with body camera footage. The police union lawyers scrambled to object, but the damage was done. Reporters furiously typed on their phones, the story already spreading. Some of the younger officers in attendance shifted uncomfortably, seeing their training exposed in its raw reality. Zoe, meanwhile, had organized more protests focusing specifically on legislative reform. "We need to change the laws that allow this culture to persist," she argued, addressing a crowd outside the state capitol. Her corporate law experience lent credibility to her calls for structural change. But the department had one more card to play. During a break in the hearing, Morrison approached the podium with new allegations. "Judge Carter," he claimed, "has been coordinating with known criminal elements to undermine law enforcement. We have evidence of meetings with convicted felons." The evidence was photographs of Samuel's community outreach work with reformed offenders, legitimate programs twisted to appear sinister. It was a desperate move, but one that demonstrated how far the department would go to maintain its power. Samuel, rather than backing down, saw an opportunity. "Yes," he declared from the witness stand, "I meet with former offenders. I believe in rehabilitation, in second chances. That's what justice should be about, not protecting those who abuse their power, but helping those who want to change." His response resonated beyond the hearing room, touching on deeper questions about the purpose of law enforcement and the meaning of justice. Social media exploded with support as people shared their own stories of redemption and reform. The hearing stretched into evening, each side fighting for control of the narrative. But something had shifted. The department's tactics, once effective in silencing dissent, now appeared desperate and dated in the face of documented evidence and public scrutiny. As darkness fell over Phoenix, Maya received another anonymous email. More officers were ready to come forward, inspired by Chen's courage and disgusted by the department's smear tactics. The wall of silence was cracking. The battle lines were clearly drawn now. On one side, a system fighting to maintain its power through intimidation and deception. On the other, an unlikely alliance of a judge, a corporate lawyer, and a law student, backed by growing public support and mounting evidence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attacks, new attempts to discredit their cause. But tonight, watching the news coverage of the hearing, Samuel, Zoe, and Maya knew they had crossed a crucial threshold. The truth, once exposed, could not be easily buried again. The morning headlines screamed across Phoenix. Police Chief Williams arrested. The pre-dawn raid on the department headquarters had uncovered servers containing years of deliberately altered evidence, hidden complaints, and explicit instructions for covering up police misconduct. The chief's desperate attempt to destroy these records had been thwarted by FBI agents who had been quietly building their own case, parallel to Samuel's. In his office, Assistant District Attorney James Martinez held a press conference that shook the department to its core. What began with Judge Carter's assault has led us to uncover one of the most extensive police corruption schemes in recent history, he announced, his words broadcast live across national networks. The evidence was overwhelming. Chief Williams had orchestrated a sophisticated system of protection for corrupt officers, complete with financial kickbacks, fabricated reports, and a network of intimidation that spread through multiple levels of law enforcement. Officer Morrison, facing his own arrest, had finally broken under pressure. "They told me to make it go away," Morrison testified, his arrogance replaced by desperation. Every complaint, every witness, every piece of evidence that threatened the system. We had procedures for handling all of it. The chief called it maintaining order, but it was about power and control. Maya sat in the courtroom, her laptop open to a document that had started as a simple case study and evolved into a blueprint for national police reform. Her research had helped identify patterns that the FBI used to crack the department's internal coding system for marking problem officers and citizens. The revelation that hit hardest came from financial records. The department had maintained a secret fund, drawn from seized assets, used specifically to silence witnesses and discredit whistleblowers. Officer Chen's testimony had been the first crack, but the FBI's investigation revealed the full scope of the corruption. Samuel received the news in his chambers, surrounded by Zoe and Maya. The television showed footage of police officers being led out of headquarters in handcuffs, including some who had testified against him. The sight brought no joy, only a profound sense of the work still ahead. This isn't just about punishment, he reflected, watching the coverage. It's about rebuilding something broken. The community needs to trust law enforcement again, and that trust has to be earned. A month later, Samuel stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a congressional hearing on police reform. His case had become a catalyst for national change. Maya's research had evolved into a comprehensive proposal for new oversight mechanisms and accountability measures. "We cannot police a community without its trust," he testified, "and we cannot earn that trust without transparency, accountability, and a commitment to justice that applies equally to those who enforce the law and those they serve." The legislation that emerged, known as the Carter Act, mandated independent oversight of police departments, protected whistleblowers, and created new standards for body camera footage and use of force. More importantly, it provided a framework for rebuilding trust between law enforcement and communities. Zoe, who had finally left her corporate law firm, now headed a new civil rights division focused on implementing these reforms. Her experience on both sides of the legal system proved invaluable in bridging gaps between law enforcement and community advocates. Maya graduated law school with highest honors, her thesis on police reform already being implemented in departments across the country. She turned down offers from prestigious firms to work with Samuel and Zoe, continuing their mission of systematic change. The final scene played out where it had begun, on that Phoenix street where Samuel had been assaulted. A new training facility now stood there, named after Officer Chen, dedicated to teaching community-oriented policing and ethical law enforcement practices. As Samuel cut the ribbon at the facility's opening, he saw faces in the crowd that told the story of their journey. Reformed officers who had found the courage to speak out, community members who had shared their stories, and a new generation of police cadets committed to doing better. "This is not the end," he told the gathered crowd. "It's a beginning. Every day we must choose justice over convenience, truth over protection, and courage over comfort. That's how we build a system worthy of both those who serve and those they protect." The sunset painted the Phoenix sky in shades of hope as 3 generations of changemakers, Samuel, Zoe, and Maya, stood together, their individual sacrifices having forged a path toward lasting reform. The system hadn't just been exposed, it had been transformed, offering a model for cities across the nation struggling with the same challenges. The story of one judge's assault had become a testament to the power of persistence, truth, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. As night fell on Phoenix, the lights of the new training facility illuminated more than just a building. They lit the way forward for a community ready to heal and rebuild.